All right, so we are about halfway through the series, but I did want to give you guys a couple of announcements before we get into it. So at your tables is the first announcement. Underneath the discussion questions is an opportunity for you to serve and love the Rock women that are meeting right upstairs. Okay, so throughout the series, we're talking about how we do our relationships within the church. And so what you've got on your table is one blank and then one sample page. So the sample page is something I wrote. I created two different cards. So they're just one paragraph, and what I did is I just created samples so you guys could see, hey, this is the kind of notes that you could write. And then the blanks are for you to fill in yourself. So on the blanks, it says, Dear Sister in Christ. And then on the bottom, it's signed Rock Men. So it's because it's coming from the group. So don't worry about signing it by yourself for your own name. It's just to take a chance to encourage the women that meet upstairs. So if you want to take a verse and say, hey, I read this when I was reading the Bible the other day. Here's my thoughts on it. I think it should encourage you. And those two are there to serve as examples. You've got blanks there to fill out two. If you want to write two of the same or two different ones, that would be great. And yes, there are a decent amount more women. So if you want to write 3 or 4 of them, you go right ahead. We'd be glad to have that because they have usually like 100 women upstairs. So, take the time to consider. That's one option. If you're more into making food or getting someone to make food for you that you can put your name on, that's another option. So what we're going to do is I'm passing them out this week for you guys to have an opportunity. So if you want to do the cards, bring them back next week. We're going to collect them all, cut them out, send them upstairs, and then the women can pick them up on their way out so they can have an encouraging note for the week. The other option, food, if you're going to do that, we're also going to pick that up next week so that you can have a chance to pass those along as well. If you want to put your name on that so they come back with any food poisoning and pin it on you, that's up to you. Last opportunity, so I don't know if you guys have seen it, but usually right down here in the hallway is the women come down here and meet in the little children's classrooms, and somebody sets up tables every week. So it'd be great to get some variety in there. Say, hey, I'll do it this week, once a month, something like that. It's a chance to serve the women because they come down, they don't have to grab their chairs and take time to set up. They can come sit down, get right into their discussion time. Okay, so 3 opportunities to serve the women as we're talking about how we do these relationships with inside the church. So our discussion here tonight will be about the men, but chance to serve the women as well. So if you got any questions on that, let me know. We're planning on doing, oh, yes, wow, you got a question already. Huh? On the computer? Oh, is your handwriting not that great? Yeah. I feel you there. Yeah, I can send it out. Yep. Can you remind me at the end to email it out to everybody? Okay, thanks. Yeah, you're probably not the only one, Paul, so thanks for asking on many people's behalfs. Okay, so we are looking at doing a baptism at the end, but I don't see him here yet today, so he might show up a little late. That's fine. A gentleman came in asking last week, hey, I saw the baptisms over the weekend services, and I want to hear more about that, so I walked him through, make sure he understood the gospel and understands what baptism means, and so if he comes, if he's able to get here, I know sometimes he has a hard time getting here on time or little other things come up. We'll be doing a baptism afterwards, after all the discussion is done, and then we'll go upstairs, and by then the women should be done as well. Okay, so a few announcements. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get to the text, but I did want to take a time to pause. Since we're halfway through this talk on a godly man as a brother in the body, to take time to say, hey, here are the things that I've been hearing from the tables I sit at and what other table leaders are telling me and passing along to me as good reasons why we're spending time on this. Because it is 5 weeks, but it also is a very important topic of what we've been covering so far is What is the church? And then we've been talking about, last week we started talking about this little Greek word that shows up 50 times in the New Testament. It's this one another. How do I do relationships with one another? That's how you would translate that word. It's a really helpful word. So a couple of things that I noticed as we were talking at the tables is you guys probably get this general sense that currently we have a lot of distance between people. You can communicate in all kinds of ways, but the connection is not always there, especially on social media. You post something, it goes out there, you shoot back and forth to someone you don't actually see, talk to, hear about their life. It's easy to communicate, but not necessarily to connect. And that's what a lot of these talks are about. A lot of these passages are about how do we connect with one another. When we do this life-on-life discipleship, as we share our discipleship with one another, there's things that you can work out. We brought it up last week. There's sticky issues like money. How do we encourage one another to be accountable with our money? That's like a sticky thing. That's a very personal, I do, but I don't want you to tell me what to do, and so forth. That's best worked out in relationships. Versus I could be off by myself, deceiving myself and telling myself, oh, I'm doing a great job. But I really have nobody else to tell me whether I'm on track or not without these relationships in the church. You also have noticed that there's a lot of need for reconciliation in the world, right? I mean, you see it on the news, you see it all kinds of politics and whatnot. So not to get into that, but we have a God who has reconciled us to him. We should first learn to reconcile our relationships in here first. Have these internal conflicts and resolution and reconciliation going on before we can present to the rest of the world, hey, we have a God who initiates reconciliation and we try to follow after him. We have something to offer on the reconciliation front. Something else that happened in another table that I wasn't sitting at, but I also get a few emails about, and just a general sense that the church is equated with the leaders of the church or those people who are on staff and get paid. If that was the case, how is the Great Commission going to get finished? How are we going to do that? How is like meeting people's needs going to get done? How are all these things going to happen if only 1% of the church body was actually doing it? You guys are already taking advantage. You're already showing initiative by coming to hear from the word, talk about other things going on in your life at your tables. So when you think about the church, there's more than just that 1%. Like if there's 1,500 members here, which there's about 12 to 15 people on staff, full and part-time. That's only 1%. We can't do 100% of the work, nor would we want to, because our job is to equip you guys, to serve you guys, and to help you grow up as disciples. A lot of you already got great experience, and you can help others, and vice versa. One other thing that I'm curious how you guys are going about this, and you can talk about it at your tables, is what will people see when they come to see the church? I'm not talking just like an attendance on a Sunday morning, albeit that's probably their first way they're going to see it. Just what are they going to see? They could see all kinds of things. I love to watch after service and before service, people chatting with each other, enjoying conversations, enjoying relationships, catching up with one another, that camaraderie, that encouragement, people hugging and just laughing and smiling. They could see that. They could see all kinds of other things because we get to be a family. You get to see God at work. You get to be a part of what God is doing at this church and in this town and these towns nearby. You get to be, like if you went on the Uper tour or the Shoreline tour, you got to be a part of the rest of the state. And if you've ever been on a mission trip, you get to be a part of the things that God is doing all over the place. You also get to see, like, when you go to those other things, you start to get a vision of something larger than just what's happening as I bustle around at my local workplace and my local family. There's a lot going on that God is doing in and through the church. You get to foster an environment. If you want to complain about the environment that is here at the church, oh, I don't like how they do that. I wouldn't do that. Say something, do something about it. Don't sit there and be like, well, I'll complain about that thing, but I'm not going to do anything about it. That doesn't really compute very well. If you've got an idea, raise your hand. Let us know. We'd be glad to see how we can interact with that. Okay. So what do you guys think are other things that people would want to see? I'm going to suggest they're going to want to see a certain kind of environment that's attractive, that gets them to see, wow, what is that? That's different. Oh, that's what I would like to see. That is what drew me to Christ initially, was seeing my girlfriend's mom and her relationships with it. Like, I want some of that. I'm curious about that. I don't see that happening in my household. I don't see that happening in my extended family. Not that they were terrible. It's just there was something different there. And I could tell. I could put my finger on it because I saw it. So you get a chance to create this environment that other people see as a watching world always is looking. And they're always looking with a critical eye, but they're always looking to see, do you have something better? We don't always do it perfectly. So I'm going to suggest that there are 3 things that people would like to see in the environment of the church, and I think you guys would love to experience in this environment, whether it's on this Tuesday night or if you go to one of the other ministries throughout the week, Sunday, Saturday service, whatever. And I think they'll come up, and you'll see them come up when we talk about this little Greek word, alelon. Okay, if you weren't here last week, that's how you say that, alelon. The 3 I'm going to talk about tonight are peace, unity, and love. These are goals of our relationships with one another. Yeah, okay. I got to pause a second. That probably sounds like something from the 60s and 70s. Okay? That's not what I'm going for. And I can't really speak to that because I wasn't there. Okay? But these are things based in the scripture, based on God's character and work that's already happened in history to show, I want to see this in my people. God has done these things. We as his children should act like how God is working in and through us and how he's already demonstrated that love. So I want you guys to go ahead and open up. And we'll see the first one. We'll talk about peace in Mark 9:50. Mark chapter 9, verse 50. Hey, come on in, grab a seat. So in this verse here at the end of the chapter, the disciples have been arguing with each other about who's the greatest. They're arguing who's the greatest disciple, and I think I did this and that and the other thing. And here's what Jesus says at the end of his response to their discussion. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with each other. Their pride is causing them to argue about who's the greatest. They're sitting next to the person who is the greatest. But they're arguing amongst themselves about, well, I'm the great. Obviously, I'll be sitting at the left hand or the right hand of Jesus. But that's not what he's getting at. Because what is that going to do? Their argument is causing discord amongst them. They don't recognize who is the greatest, so they're fighting out who's the greatest, and that's not creating the peace that Jesus is talking about that should exist amongst his disciples. So another passage, I think you'll see that this is kind of the church's MO. This is Romans 14:19. Jumping over to Romans 14. So we could go through a lot of chapter 14, but just right here in verse 19. So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and building up one another. If you were not fighting and arguing about who's the greatest, and your consideration is for the other person first, and you're considering, well, how can I build them up? I can't really see dissension and discord and envying happening when you're trying to build up another person. Here's a great chance and a way to pursue peace, that you would build the other person up, that you would consider the other person. Now, one more verse. We have read this one before, but man, there's several one another's right here in the middle of Ephesians chapter 4. So I know we're kind of jumping around, It's because this word comes up so much, and there's so much good stuff to go with it. Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, urge you to live worthily of the calling with which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So there's some attributes of how it goes. It's a contrast, again, against the pride and the competing against one another, because you have to do this with humility and gentleness and patience. I mean, it sure does take some patience to put up with one another's issues, right? I mean, we can say we're a family, but let's be honest, we are a family full of dysfunction, right? And is that okay? Well, it's going to have to be. It ain't going to get perfect until, I don't know, Jesus comes back or we meet each other in heaven. So you get a chance to put up and practice patience, which is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It's a work of the Spirit to have something like this. I mean, these things, humility, gentleness, patience, putting up with one another in love, making every effort to keep unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Like, that sounds like something I want to be a part of. That's an atmosphere I want to see. That's an atmosphere I'm willing to work hard for, to say, I will surrender my pride so that I can have that chance to do that for someone else. And then obviously this is a reciprocal pronoun, so they would hopefully reciprocate that back to me. But even if they don't, I still have the same command. So you kind of notice how we're starting to blur the line between peace and unity. Right here, I mean, we've got unity. So they're not really separate, right? You can't really have unity amongst people who disagree, and then that disagreement on major issues, we can disagree about small, minor things, okay, like rock and roll or blues. But on these major things, if we have unity on them, you're going to have peace as a result. So another one here that goes with unity particularly is Colossians Chapter 3. Okay, so just a few pages there. Colossians 3, 14 to 15. And to all these virtues add love, which is the perfect bond. Let the peace of Christ be in control in your heart. For you were, in fact, called as one body to this peace, and be thankful. So you have this bond of peace and unity, bringing things together that could easily be separated, right? It'd be easy to put up walls against one another and say, he doesn't have the same things he doesn't like the same things I like. He doesn't share the same, hobbies or whatnot. That's not a necessary wall. Okay, you don't share all the same things in common with your own wife. I mean, it's okay. You can get past those things because they're secondary or tertiary type things. Okay? We're not going to look through all of these. I just want to put up a couple more. You guys can look them up later. Romans 12 and 15, and then Philippians 2. So what you're going to find in these passages is the same phrase 3 times. This same phrase is, think the same thing towards one another. Think the same thing towards one another. Or some of your translations might say, be of the same mind. Well, it's kind of hard to be of the same mind when you're divided. It's talking about unity, that you would stay together on these core issues, say, yes, Jesus is God. He's the only way I can be saved. Okay? There is a Trinity. The Bible is authoritative. These core issues bring us together. They form a basis for peace and unity. And if I was also thinking of this, of having the same thing in mind towards you, and you were doing that to me, it's kind of like Jesus' great commandment. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, I've got to be conscientiously thinking about that. Okay, it's not a happenstance that I just fall into doing that, because that's not my natural disposition. We've got a chance to be like God, who demonstrates reconciliation to bring peace between him and us. Now we can distribute that horizontally as well, as we talked about a few weeks ago, making that connection between horizontal and vertical. You guys have probably heard this statement. I love this statement. In the beginning of Psalm 133, it says, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity." I've seen it. I've been a part of it. It's refreshing. It just is refreshing to be in a place where I can say, I am willing to do battle with these guys. I'm willing to stand up for them. I'm willing to be united. I'm all in with them because we have the same cause, the same master, the same leader. So it kind of leads you to the last, which is kind of obvious, right? The goal of love. So I want to look at one example which kind of begs the question. Okay? The example I'm talking about is in Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. Verses 1 and 2. So here Paul says, brothers and sisters, if a person is discovered in some sin, you who are spiritual, restore such a person in a spirit of gentleness. Pay close attention to yourselves so that you're not tempted to, right, to do the same thing that they caught themselves in. Carry one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Man, this is like a few decades after Christ has ascended. What is he referring to? Is he referring to, hey, Jesus just told us to love everyone? He's talking about disciples because he's writing to a church. His audience is a church. He's saying, carry one another's burdens, and this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Well, where is he? He's got to have a source for this. Where is this source? So you'll read all over the New Testament and the epistles, a lot of this, love one another. They're all getting it from the same place. They're all getting it right from the lips of Jesus. Back in John 13. This is the law Jesus lays down, and I really want you guys to focus on this one. John 13, verses 34 to 35. I was half tempted to just spend the whole time here, because this is just, it's obviously the lips of Jesus, and he lays down a new law, a new commandment. So this is in his last talk, right? These few chapters are just hours before he's going to go on trial and be crucified. And this is what he has to say to his disciples towards the end here. And it gets repeated later in chapter 15 and also in chapter 17. So John 13, 34 to 35. I give you a new commandment, to love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Everyone will know by this that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. He's talking to his disciples. This is not a general command to love everyone. Jesus already said that, like chapters ago. This is a specific command to love fellow disciples. That's how the rest of the world is going to know that you're a disciple of Jesus, that this place houses disciples of Jesus, by the way we love one another. It's new because he already said the other, right? He already affirmed the greatest commandment when he was put on the spot by people asking him. But it's new. What's new about it? Loving people sounds familiar. He's already said that. The new part about it is the standard. Who and what is the standard? Verse 34, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. The disciples have been watching Jesus for 3 years now. right? About 3 years, and they've seen his love. And you know what? They're about to witness the full extent of his love on the cross and resurrection and ascension. They're going to become utterly convinced by the love of God. They're going to write about it so much. They're going to write about it and use this word, this little word, love one another, 17 times. They're just so obsessed about it because they know the great love that Jesus has. And now he sets himself as the standard. He also sets himself as the inspiration. Right? Jesus says, no greater love has a man than this, than to lay down his life for his brothers. He also is the embodiment. Right? God is love, that you'll see in 1 John that we'll talk about. Well, he is God. He is love. And he also enables us by the power of the Spirit to love other people. So this commandment is said to specific people, but then it gets passed on to us because it's part of the Great Commission. Part of the Great Commission is to baptize them and teach them all that I have commanded. And this is one of the commands. So later on, okay, this is John writing. We'll look at 1 John in just a second. Later on, John gets old, obviously. Like, he passes many other disciples and is the oldest disciple in the late first century. And he just can't get up and speak and do all, but he continues to go to churches where he is known, and he continues to pass along this commandment. Other church historians keep recount this story that Jesus would come to a church and say, you should love one another. And you just keep repeating it. Love one another. Don't you have anything else to say to us, John? Love one another. That's the command from the master. And if it's done, it is enough. That's John's frequent words to his churches that he's known in. Like, I hope by the time I'm like 90 or something, I keep saying that. I'd love to see that. Especially in a pastoral role where I'm trying to help people to love one another, because then we'll have this community seeing that we are disciples of the Lord. So over in 1 John 3-4, you'll see the disciples John, the Apostle John's obsession. So let's jump over to 1 John 3-4, and we'll go ahead and wrap up with this. We don't have time to read both chapters. I just want to point out a few highlights to you guys over in 1 John, which is towards the back if you're unfamiliar. So in 1 John 3-4, John shows himself, he's the one who uses the word the most. So in chapter 3, right at the beginning, you see the love of God. Let's start with chapter 3, verses 1-3. See what sort of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called God's children, and indeed we are. For this reason, the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Dear friends, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet been revealed. We know that whenever it is revealed, we will be like him, because we will see him just as he is. And everyone who has this hope focused on him purifies himself just as Jesus is pure. You see the foundation here. It's the love of God. Jump down towards the middle of chapter 4. You'll see the same foundation. Chapter 4, verses 10-12. Little side note. You know how we put rocks over there before we poured the concrete in the box? How many of you guys were there for that? Okay. This is the one I wrote on my rock. A little personal plug, but whatever. Chapter 4, verse 10. And this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, if God so loved us, then we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God resides in us, and his love is perfected in us. How are people going to see the love of God? They're going to see it all over the scriptures, right? They're also going to see it all over our interactions as we love one another. So a couple other passages that you guys could read if you want to write them down, that you'll see this quick tie. The love of God compels me to love my brother and sister. So I'm going to just list them out, and if you guys want to go back later, you can go ahead. Chapter 3, verses 10 to 11. Chapter 3, verses 23 to 24. And chapter 4, 7 to 8. Okay. So they're also up here if you weren't able to catch that. These would be great passages to see John's repetition of what it means and how we do it, of loving one another. And I think if you read through those passages, these are what you're going to see. That loving each other shows that we indeed are God's children. Right? He said, you're God's children, and now the rest of the next couple of chapters are a test to see, this is what God's children do. Are you doing it? Because if you are, then you can be really assured that you are a child of God. It shows that we abide in Christ. Christ gave the commandment, and he also said, if you love me, you will obey my commands, back in John 14. He also gave a promise. I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit. And the evidence of the Spirit's work of our loving one another is Jesus' promise being fulfilled, which is a great promise indeed, because I don't know if you've noticed, but without the work of God, I don't see communities loving one another. I really haven't seen that much in history either. Maybe little blips here and there, but we could be a continual light that shines in the darkness. So there are other passages down at the bottom of your discussion questions. Again, this is the most frequent one another command, is to love one another. So that's why I wrote them all down for you. You can check them out later at your leisure. Okay? But just wanted to give you guys this look on, why do we do this? Why do we spend time? We have these goals of peace, unity, and love. I want you to see that God initiates these things with us. He has shown us love, and he has brought us peace by reconciling us to himself. So now we have a great foundation to be unified together. So it's a chance for you to do something on a small scale that God has already done and now has empowered you to do. So we ended last week with a reminder that these one another's, this all alone, is not meant to be done all alone. You can't do them all alone. It takes others. But what an opportunity. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and talk about these goals, these three goals of peace, unity, and love, and what it looks like for you guys, and how we might spur one another on.